All right, mobile folks, I am back. And in this module, we get to do a tiny little bit of something that ideally I'd want to do a whole lot more in a course like this. Is we're going to take a look at a design tool, something that you, students, friends, could use either personally or professionally to make something cool that could live on a mobile phone, which could support a project that would, say, partially or entirely involve a mobile phone in terms of how it facilitates whatever interactions you want to do. And it's a design tool that's got a lot going for it. We don't need to get into it all just right now, and I'm aware of that danger on my end, but for us, for now, I guess first of all, this tool called Twine is super, super easy to use. This is something that you will be up and running with in essentially no time. You'll be able to make something within the first time you sit down with it, no problem. It's very much cross-platform. It works across desktop and mobile, although the creation is a desktop thing, either in a browser or an app that you download from the program. It's free, which is also another real benefit. It's not just free to use as an author either. What you end up producing when you make this is a web page. And so there are places where you can put those web pages for free, but also if you are in a situation where you're trading files with people, you can give them an HTML file and it will open within their browser. You can host this on your own web server, and we'll check out a game that I've set up on my web server. It's very fungible and sort of open in that sense in terms of what you create. The tool itself is open source software, and so even though that's not necessarily a guarantee that it'll be around forever, you and everyone else are welcome to download the source code, make changes to it, all the good things that we would normally associate with open source software. The other thing that I want to bring up that it's for is we could use like a normal website builder, something like Wix or Weebly or Google Drive or Sites or any of those things that people use on a more sort of day-to-day basis. But I wanted to pick something where the thing that you would be creating with it could be different enough to maybe get you into a frame of mind where you're thinking about what are the real possibilities out there with a different form of media rather than just maybe encoding some existing set of lessons or something like that. So what Twine does is it makes it easy to create what I always refer to as choose your own adventure stories. Branching narrative, interactive narrative, nonlinear stories. There's lots of different names for these things, but my sort of cultural touchstone is choose your own adventure books that I grew up with, where you read a passage and then you make a choice about where to go next, and it has you turn to a different page. Obviously, since this is web-based, it will take you there through hyperlinks, but the same basic setup is there. There are some things that come along with that, is that one is that Twine is based on text to start with. You can use more than text, and you can do some pretty fancy things with text, but it is not a sort of inherently multimedia-centric kind of a thing. And maybe we can get into some of those details, though I said before, I don't want to get too far down into the weeds today. But I guess to start with, so the idea of this module is for you to create something using Twine. And partly it's that Twine is a neat tool that I want to introduce you to, but also Twine is emblematic of the kinds of things that you might come across. There are lots of new tools all the time, things that have some reference points that you may be familiar with, but maybe things that you haven't really seen or at the very least created with before. And so as someone who works in this world of sort of mobile learning innovation or anything that surrounds that, I find that a big chunk of my life is sort of having to come up to speed on tools that I didn't know existed the week before. And so even if Twine doesn't represent for you the kind of creative world that you're necessarily trying to live in, I think it can represent some very important toeholds to work through in terms of what it's like to take on a new tool, try and wrap your head around it technically, try and wrap your head around it in terms of what the real possibilities are for creating interaction, and that sort of thing. So I hope getting a small chance to make something in what I imagine is a brand new tool will be a useful learning experience for you. I've had a lot of fun with this tool, so I'm also sort of trying to spread the joy here. Let's see. Before we dig into some of the things that I want to show you, or actually, let's just dive in. So this is the Twine homepage. This is twinery.org. And you can, from here, either log in via the browser to the editor tool and start making things. The one caveat I'll tell you right now about that is that work is then saved in your browser's cache. So if you go to, it's not on an online account or anything like that. So if you go to another computer, you open another browser, your work will not be there. It doesn't mean that you can't take your work with you. Like I said, the ultimate data format is just an HTML file. So it's very easy to download your work and make use of it and take it somewhere else to share it with someone else. That's super easy. But one of the expectations we might have from using things like Google Docs or things like that where we sign into an account and everything's kept on a server is broken here. When you use Twine in the browser, you're using it locally, not in some central online platform. You can also use Twine directly on your computer in an app. Those apps got updated kind of recently. I don't know if you can see on this webpage, but the most recent version that came out was the 8th of January, 2023. So that's always a good sign to see with some of these smaller independent software projects, to see if they're actively developed and maintained. And in this case, the recent changes to the desktop apps have been quite good. It runs on both Windows and Mac. I don't know if there's a Linux version. There might be, but we would need to look into that. Further down this page, you can see there's some help getting to know Twine. One of the things I really do like about it is that it is well used, it is well trodden ground, so there are lots of help sources out there for you. Starting to begin with the Twine reference guide and the Twine cookbook that are sort of first party guides, and so they're helpful. We can take a look at those real quick. This is the Twine reference guide. Very basic description sort of text. What is Twine good at? Text-based storytelling, branching narratives, web-based publishing. What is Twine bad at? Heavy use of multimedia, online multiplayer play. Interactions that involve more of a world than a direction that you go through in a branching narrative. Depending on how complicated your world is, there are other tools that specialize in creating things like that. And then up here at the top, there's a menu that is quite in-depth in terms of how you would use this tool. You by no means have to read all of this to get started, but it is a way that when you get stuck or you're trying to figure out how to do something, you've got an easy place where you can go and sort of look for the proper heading without having to go searching on the broader web. Let's also look at the Twine cookbook. This is maybe a little bit more of a direct technical guide, but it works sort of the same. It's a web page and it's got these chapter headings and everything that you can dive into. And of course, there's a search up here that you can find things with. One of the technical details that I'll share with you right now is here on the homepage. It's right here. Each of Twine's built-in story formats has an online guide. Sorry, I tried to zoom in on that. Chapbook, Harlow, Snowman, and Sugar Cube. So getting to understand what a story format is and which one you want to use is a big part of getting to know Twine. You don't have to do it this week. This week you can mostly ignore it. If you just download Twine and start using it, you will be in what's known as the Harlow story format. But if you want to know about story formats, we can of course talk about them and they'll be present in all of these guides, in all of the introductory materials you might find about it. So for instance, maybe these guides and reading along aren't working for you. You could go over to YouTube and search for Twine, and you will find lots of tutorials, lots of people's games their games are being talked about, whether from an educational perspective or from a creative arts perspective or from some other place they're coming from. Twine has a pretty big footprint on the web. Another place you'll find it, and this is especially important for people that are getting serious about making something with Twine and thinking about what it is they would make. This is a website called itch.io, itch.io, and it is an indie game storefront. So you can buy games here, and not just Twine games, but Twine is one of the tools that people make games with. And because Twine is so easy for individual creators to use, itch.io is a place where a lot of individual creators that don't have, let's say, a full-time job making games or entire teams or large monetary ambitions for their work, they will put them out into the world in a place where they can get found and noticed and maybe even bought. There's quite as you can see, a complex search engine here on itch.io. There are lots and lots of entries, and you can see even just the games that are tagged with Twine, there's over 5,000 of them. If you're looking for a first one to play, which is the one I was just reading about, The Temple of No. There's also a YouTube video about it that I noticed. That might be a place to start out, but you'll see there are Twine games about pretty much any topic. Lots of them tend to be like dating simulators or otherwise sort of social conversation kinds of things, which is easy to imagine that goes along well with the choose your own adventure format. You can also, of course, search more broadly on the internet for things that people have made with Twine, for people talking about the uses of Twine in educational settings, all kinds of stuff. One of the things that you will come up against, hopefully, in the time that we spend this week or so on Twine, is the idea that if you were to say, imagine Twine as the publishing platform that you are using for an online e-learning, m-learning course, it's sort of a weird fit. And one of the hard things to do as, say, someone who is an educator coming to the world of different media formats is to imagine all of these different platforms and settings as modes and methods of delivering content that you want people to take in, to memorize, to regurgitate. That's the game that's often set up in a classroom. But this choose your own adventure format idea has different possibilities within it, different affordances, different constraints, and putting that square peg of content delivery into the round hole of Twine can often feel very awkward, and is also the thing that we notice when we're looking at educational media, regardless of platform or mode or medium, is that it's still just content delivery. And so one of the things I would encourage you to do in this week is to imagine what the format, this idea of making choices, of using mostly text, although possibly text supported by multimedia, what that can do to create inroads to the worlds that you might be trying to introduce people to as an educator. And I know that sounds kind of vague, and I'll try and make it specific in a couple of ways here. This webpage that I've been on for a moment here is an example of someone who is trying to offer not technical advice with a tool like Twine, but design advice. So this is Emily Short, and one of her blog posts, this one is on Storylit. So if this is in our modules, our syllabus, whatever, but you could also just Google Emily Short Storylit and you would find this. It's a well-known blog post. And she describes, we don't need to go through the whole thing here, some possible structures of connecting these branching bits of story to each other. and what some of the possibilities for those branching structures can be. One of the first design challenges for anyone making interactive nonlinear content is this geometric expansion of possibilities. If you've got 3 choices and each one of those 3 choices leads to 3 more choices, and all you ever do is continue branching out, after about 5 levels, you've got a heck of a lot of content to try and make, something that's no longer going to be humanly possible. And so the idea of how to give the player, the user, the reader the sense of having options without creating even just the outset a very monumental work for the writer is a challenge. But the other thing that Emily Short does on this post is describe a little bit about how you can achieve aims that you have as a writer other than, not being working forever. Things that you might want to do for your readers, the kinds of feelings you can give them. And keeping track of what feelings you want to create is, I think, one of the best perspectives to have as a creator, rather than this is the content that I need to have delivered. I think when you start thinking about the emotional experiences of the people on the other end, that's when you start having some real insight into making something that can be powerful. And for me, that's one of the reasons why, even when I'm making things that if someone was looking at them from the outside, they wouldn't call them games. I feel like the language and the discussions of game design end up being very helpful, because they are very often focused on what that player experience is more than what the content that's in the box actually is. And I find that to be very valuable. So stuff like Emily Short's post here can be useful in trying to wrap your head around what the creative possibilities are in something like a choose your own adventure story that Twine can make possible. I also have a concrete example of my own that I can show you, and that's here. This is a math story that I created, and it's about the idea of solving cubic equations. And I'm not cruel enough to make you go through this whole thing here, but in one of the classes I teach in honors, we want to rehash the difficulties and the insight into solving what we now call cubic equations that happened in the 16th century in Italy. Most famously, this guy Cardano figured out a way to pull these equations apart and find a solution. Although, again, the word equation is sort of out of place there. Equations didn't exist until later. But rather than just having my students try and do everything on their own, I thought that the multiple choice format would give them a chance to make bad choices in a safe way, but also be able to accomplish the solving of this problem more easily than they would by hand. All they have to do is make a choice to go forward. So the way this works is you start out, let's say you want to solve the following equation, x cubed plus 6x equals 20. You could try, and then here there are 4 choices. Quadratic formula, to factor it, Cardano's formula, or to guess an answer. And each of those paths goes somewhere. Like I said, Cardano's the famous guy, so his formula is eventually going to be the right answer, but let's go ahead and pick one of the wrong answers, the quadratic formula. And before I choose that, I do want to point out that the one teeny tiny fancy thing that I'm doing here is, if you notice, this is some nice looking math typesetting, and you'll continue to see that as you go on. And one of the things I was able to do is to think about the way that Twine was working as an entity making use of HTML and JavaScript, and the existence of a JavaScript math typesetting library called MathJax, and then to spend enough time on forums and stuff figuring out how to link them together. And so in some ways, for me, this is a proof of concept about being able to bring these two worlds together, as much as it was a pedagogical experiment. So anyway, let's choose quadratic formula. Most people remember that that's a thing. So it seems like a likely wrong choice. I know you remember this, but here's the quadratic formula just to make sure. Again, while a lot of math classes might be interested in having people memorize this formula, I want to think a little bit bigger picture and have people be aware of a more general problem solving mindset than remembering specific formulas. So for me, handing this over isn't a big thing. And I'll ease up on the details from here on out. We can go back through this as a work later. But notice the math typesetting again. And then so I say, is this how you should do it? Go for it. Or I want to go back. Let's go for it. So then the question is, does that give you this or this for X? And if you're careful with your minus signs, you get the right one. If you're not careful with the minus signs, you get the other. This happens to be the right one. It says you've performed the quadratic formula correctly. Can we tell if this is the solution? So again, remember, the question isn't just how to do the quadratic formula, but what are we doing the quadratic formula for in the first place? And it's a more existential question than students are often comfortable with in this sort of setting, but I thought Twine would be a chance to make that be the level on which things were turning. I don't know, just turn it in. That's the way most students feel. So let's choose that. Say, okay, fine, you're wrong, 0 points. And it might be a dumb thing to do, but I wanted to put that obvious typo there to maybe get people thinking about stuff. If that makes sense. Anyway, that can take you back to the beginning, and here we are back at the beginning. And I don't know if you can read the URL up there at the top, but this exists as a web page on my own server, localgameslab.org/cubic. You're welcome to go there. This will be mentioned in the other materials as well, so you don't need to worry about it. But if you go to Cardano's formula, then you get this giant thing, and you can maybe see why students wouldn't want to memorize it. It's a lot worse than the quadratic formula. And then the details are a little bit more specific here. And then you keep going. And it turns out that getting the right equation is sort of just the beginning of the problem, and there's a lot of writing and a lot of reading. So anyway, this is an example of what someone can make in Twine, and a concrete example, I think, small enough to wrap your head around whether or not the math means anything to you in a way that you can do within the time we have, I hope, and maybe try and make something of your own that's a little bit interesting, but not huge. So let me show you what this actually looks like inside Twine itself. So let's see, let me jump over. So this is what it looks like inside Twine. We're now inside the Twine app, and I have zoomed in. This solving a cubic is where everything starts. And so one of the things that Twine makes easy for you as the creator is it does everything graphically. This branching narrative literally visually branches as you draw it. And you can move those branches around to make them easier to see, to make them ordered a little bit better. And then each one of those branches, and maybe let me switch back and forth a little bit here. So let's go back again to that Safari window where we've got the Twine game itself. And let me refresh this page and go back to the beginning. So this is what it looks like to the player, to the reader. And then in Twine, this node looks like this. Let me zoom in now on it so you can read it. Let's say you want to solve the following equation. Let's say you want to solve the following equation. They look both the same. And then here is my indication to that JavaScript library that I'm doing something that needs to get typeset in math. And then there's sort of the syntax formatting of Twine itself, where you've got these double brackets to indicate choices. Twine itself will actually make the passages for you once you write them into this passage. It will make those downstream passages for you. So when I first wrote those, it made all of these other ones. You can test from various places. You can also publish to file. This will kick out an HTML file that's very easy to sort of either publish or share with someone online or anything like that. There are also lots of specifics that we can get into later, but one of the things I really like about Twine is how legible all of this is. And actually, let me show you one thing that I'm trying to do. you remember that cubic business using Cardano's formula gets kind of long, right? So one of the things I found on reading it is that when all of that text would disappear every time someone selected something, it would be very easy to lose the thread of that conversation. So let me maybe go to one of the very ends here and see if I have what it looks like. I guess I haven't gotten that far. I'm in the middle of doing all of this. I guess I don't have this version of it right now. But one of the things I wanted to do, maybe I can see it over here. Sorry, this isn't quite what I thought I was looking at, but this is an example here. So the original time when you load this up, you would see this, and then you'd see the 4 choices. But I've made it so that when you choose the quadratic formula now, you get to still see the choice you made, and then there's a horizontal break, and then there's the next passage with all of its new choices. So you can see your own past as the reader, and as you continue on, it will unfold the story. And so I'm in the process of putting this back together. So maybe I can see from here. I can see what that looks like. So you can sort of see, I'm sorry. I gotta bring this thing back. All right, let's see what it looks like with that longer format there. So I choose the quadratic formula. Instead of everything going away, this is a story that unfolds on the page. And so my hope is that that will create a little bit more of an understanding of the consequences of that choice, what the reader has decided to unfold for themselves. And so when I finish retrofitting that Twine file, I'll put that new version up on the website and make it work that way. So anyway, I think that's a good enough introduction for now for Twine. I think this is a really fun thing to try and mess around with. Within this module, obviously it's very short. You won't have time to do a ton of work with it, but I do think there's enough time to see this new thing, imagine what the possibilities are, mess around a little bit, and maybe share some of your work with each other. And certainly to have any discussions about what it means to take on a new tool like this, what strategies you might want to use, or if using these tools is not just in your educational current, but in say like your future as a teacher or something like that. If you want to expose people to these kinds of platforms and have them create neat new things, what that might look like as a learning goal for other people as well. I'm certainly happy to talk about the medium of Twine games and choose your own adventure stories, the possibilities of choice for design and pedagogy and all those things. But I'm mostly excited to see where you all take this. So thanks for checking this out, trying something new, and I'll check in with you a little bit later.